trying not to cuss right now. That's how baffled I am. Hey y'all, it's your girl Raylyn, also known as Raw Fizzle, and I'm back with another video. So today we are reading. And hopefully we'll be reading for the course of this week. My last reading vlog, unforeseen circumstances occurred and I didn't really get as much footage or have as much time to just sit down and actually read. I was mainly listening to audiobooks as I was multitasking. This week I want to read text a lot more, but I definitely need to get back in my books, if you know what I mean. Another reason why I've been trying to get back into reading my physical books or on my Kindle is because sometimes when I'm listening to audiobooks, if the narrator has a voice that is not entertaining or engaging, it makes me zone out when I'm listening to it, and then I become uninterested in the plot. And I honestly hate when that happens because I feel like I'm not giving the book a fair chance because I'm basing it off of somebody else reading it to me. And a lot of times I'll try my best to tough through the audiobook, and then once I get to the end of the book, I'm giving it a poor rating because the narrator just wasn't keeping me engaged. So I want to kind of work on that this year, and if I'm reading a book or if I start listening to an audiobook and I don't like the narrator, or I find that I'm getting bored, I'm zoning out, I just need to go pick up the book if I have the physical book, or if it's at the library, or load it on my Kindle or Nook, because I don't know, I feel like I enjoyed a lot of books more when I was just reading, whether it was an ebook or reading in an actual book. I didn't start listening to audiobooks until like maybe 2.5 years ago. So it's like a 50-50 thing, because there are some books like I've read them, but when I listen to the audio, depending on the narrator, it's so much more engaging. It's like watching a movie, but sometimes it's hit and miss. Today I am reading Flyy by Omar. Tyree did mention in my last video, this is a buddy read with my friend Deja. I think she's read up to the 3rd chapter at this moment. I'm only on the 2nd chapter and it's pretty interesting so far. I didn't expect it to be as lengthy page-wise as it is. The ebook said it was like 512 pages, something like that. I haven't seen the book in person, so I don't know. I know the page lengths vary by whatever edition that you have, but I was expecting like a 200 to 300 page book. I'm not mad at that at all, because I feel like if it's long like that, then there's going to be like a lot of story development and progression. So I ain't mad at that at all. But it did kind of catch me off guard. So I'm going to read this for a minute and I'll check back in if anything worth talking about happens. So there's this line in the book that says, Mercedes could see that Hakeem wasn't for beating around the bush. He was into cutting down trees. And I'm just like, that's my first time ever hearing something like that. Like, people say beat around the bush all the time, but never heard into cutting down trees. But hey. So I ended up stopping at chapter 4 of Flyy. I don't want to get too far ahead because I am doing a buddy read with my friend. So I think I'm going to take a different direction and start a different book. Along with Flyy, I'm also listening to God Don't Make No Mistakes by Monroe. It's the final book in the God Don't Like Ugly series. In my last video, I talked about how I was reaching a point of frustration with the main character that kind of made me not want to finish the series. However, there was some drama that popped off at the end of God Ain't Through Yet, and it made me pick up God Don't Make No Mistakes. The lying, the deceit, the scheming in this book, this series as a whole. But like, just when I thought it couldn't get any crazier, any worse. Mary Monroe proves me wrong again. Reading this series, I feel like I've had to regulate my emotions. Like, I really been having to take breaks, take a walk, because some of the stuff that's been going on, it's just a book, but the feelings are real. The reading experience is very real. I had to pause it because ain't no way. I'm trying not to cuss right now. That's how baffled I am. I was getting really frustrated with this series a few days ago because Annette, the main character, like, she was just being a bystander in every situation, like not being proactive at all, and wondering like why stuff would hit the fan and, you know, why everything would fall apart. And some crazy stuff just happened, of course, in the book. I was prepared to throw my Kindle because she was showing signs of like being a bystander again, like she wasn't gonna, you know, actually speak up about what was going on. And I think Mary Monroe might have proved me wrong once again, because she said something. Now, it's still kind of early on, so I don't know like how much she is going to say, but she said something, which is just like, because I was prepared to throw my Kindle across the room if she didn't say anything. So yeah. I just had to comment on that. But I do feel like reading about a character like Annette, who is very like passive aggressive, it's definitely put things into perspective for me, just about like life in general. You cannot just sit with things and expect situations to be handled accordingly. You can't just be sitting on information. If something is bothering you, if someone is bothering you, you saw something that was wrong, you experienced something that was wrong, it may be hard, but you gotta do your part and speak up when you can. I know in certain situations, a lot of times it's not safe to do that, but when you have people in your corner who care about you and people in your corner that you care about, like, it is important to communicate those things. So yeah. It is now a whole new week, but I did finish 2 of the books that I started last week, well, that I started earlier in this video, which were God Don't Make No Mistakes by Mary Monroe and Flyy Girl by Omar Tyree. Now, I do have some notes because I have some things that I want to talk about. So starting with the book that I started with, God Don't Make No Mistakes by Mary Monroe. Overall, I give that book a 4-star rating, and the entire series I give 4 stars overall. The story was intense, but it was still lighthearted and reflective, a little bit emotional as well, but it's not like you're just reading a story about a bunch of trauma and turmoil. There's moments that are gonna make you laugh, moments that are gonna make you shake your head, moments that might make you tear up, but all in all, I feel like the reading experience for this book, it was just very real. Unrealistic in some points, or it may seem a bit exaggerated at some points, but it was still real to me. I feel like this book put a lot of things into perspective for me. One thing that really stuck out to me is the dysfunctional relationships in marriage and the fear of divorce. And there would be people that are in relationships that were no longer serving them. Either they were unhappy, they fell out of love, or they started seeing other people completely just doing their own separate thing. But it's like, you're doing all of this, but divorce is where you draw the line. Divorce is taking it too far. Like, I don't want to completely end our relationship on legal terms, but I'm gonna do what I want to do as if we're not in a relationship. And given the time that these books were published, it was early 2000s. I know a lot of people, and even now to this day, when they get married, they want to stay married because of the stability that it provides and just the fear of what may happen next without that partner. But it's like, how can you move on in your relationship but also not want to leave your relationship? Like, you've already done that. So that kind of stuck out to me. But there were situations where like there was like actual messed up things going on in marriages, and people were still like, oh, y'all better not get a divorce, huh? Reading is such an immersive experience for me, and also a reflective experience for me. My frustration with Annette and her progression as a character, I feel like, was a direct reflection of where I am at and I was at during the time when I was reading it. There were situations where Annette was being forgiving towards people who have wronged her or who have hurt her in the series, and moving forward with them, not completely as if what happened in the past didn't happen, but just choosing to move forward with them instead of leaving them behind. And in the beginning, I couldn't wrap my head around that. Like, I can understand forgiving the people but still wanting to be around them. It just made me realize that I am not giving the characters in the story enough grace and patience and forgiveness. And if I'm feeling like this about people in a book, fictional characters, then maybe I'm not giving the people in my life enough grace, showing enough patience, and giving enough forgiveness towards their actions. Because it's so easy to get caught up in the things that hurt you, the wrongdoings, the bad things. But we have to remember that all of those negative things that transpire in our lives, that we do to others and others do unto us, they do not define completely our relationship with that person and that person. Because I could do something that could hurt someone and I would still, well, I don't want to say I would expect to be forgiven, but I would expect people to not hold me to that standard of, she did this one bad thing, so she's just, let's rule her out, she's just a bad person. And that's kind of what I was doing with some of the characters. Like, oh, you got one chance, you messed it up, goodbye. So that really just kind of put things into perspective for me, that I need to give more grace, not only to the characters in the book and the writers, but to the people in my life. Because we are not our mistakes. We are not our wrongdoings, our trauma, our bad experiences. We are a lot more than that. And there was a situation in this series where Annette was still holding on to things that her husband had done to her that hurt her, and they were trying to move forward. And he kept bringing it up like, you know, you're still stuck on this and we're trying to go forward and you're still stuck on something that's in the past. And that is just something that's been sticking with me since I finished this series. Even if I choose not to continue my life with certain people in it, I still don't need to hold them to that same standard that I did when they did whatever they did that caused the relationship to end, or whatever the case may be, because I'm not allowing them to grow or be the person that they are meant to be and, you know, progress from where they were when we left off. Just because that's the version of you that I knew and that I experienced doesn't mean that that's who you are now. Another thing that this book really hit on is the importance of expression and advocating for yourself. Throughout this series, Annette struggled with that so much. She would be dealing with so much and then she would just keep it to herself. Her needs, there would be situations where her needs weren't being met and she just wouldn't say anything. And that continues to fester when you don't say anything, when you're going without. And it can turn into resentment, it can turn into rage, and you can find yourself taking your frustrations out on people who are completely like blind and ignorant to what's actually going on. And that's not right. Expression is also important because, I don't know, I just feel like as Black women, a lot of times we suppress how we feel. We suppress so much just because of what other people are going to say or how they're going to react to it. And I find myself doing that too, just kind of keeping things inside. And I'm learning as a 25-year-old adult growing up in today's day and age that you cannot expect any type of change or improvement if you are not expressing yourself and you are not advocating for yourself. If you're not doing that for yourself, it's kind of hard to expect other people to do that for you as well. Also, the importance of allowing the people that care for you to care for you. That's something that I also struggle with. A lot of times we could be dealing with things, but you know, just dealing with so many internal battles, and you can get so caught up in your head and about what you're going through and what you're dealing with that you're closing out the people around you and you're building up a wall. And then while you're sitting here isolated, dealing with what you're dealing with, you're starting to feel so lonely and you're feeling like you don't have support when there's people outside the walls that are throwing rocks and begging to get your attention to get in so that they can help you. In this series, Annette, she had some ops, I ain't gonna hold you, but she did have a community of people who were trying to be there for her, like her husband. There were situations where he was trying to be there for her and she was just so caught up in what she was dealing with and in her head about everything that she wasn't really allowing him to be there for her and to, you know, provide that shoulder for her to lean on, give her some type of support. So it is important to let the people that care for you actually care for you, because a lot of times we are the ones that are standing in the way of our own prosperity and peace of mind. Last two things I want to talk about before we move on to the next book is sheltering and silencing children and the flawed mother-daughter relationship dynamics between Black women and girls. So during the time that this book was written, I can kind of tell like that was when we were still adopting the practices of children being seen and not heard. And I feel like that hurt the main character in a way, because when she was dealing with what she was dealing with in the first two books, she kept everything to herself. She did not talk to the adults around her. And in a way, it kind of comes off as if they are not providing that safe space for her. And later on in the book, you know, after having some tough conversations, more things are revealed. But because she experienced so many things and she kept them to herself, when she became a parent, she found herself trying to protect and shelter her child. But the way that she chose to protect and shelter her child wasn't in a way that she's informing her of her own experiences and things that she may experience. She's just completely leaving her in the dark about it. Whenever Charlotte is curious about something, doesn't really matter what the topic is, her mom is just constantly seeing her as, oh, like this is my baby, she's still a baby, I need to protect her. Even as she's becoming of age, instead of actually picking the child's brain and feeding into that curiosity and actually having these conversations so that she can inform her and provide her with the proper knowledge about the things that she's curious about, she's shutting the conversation down and making it seem like, you know, like you're too young to talk about this. But when is it ever the right time to talk about certain things when it comes to children? And I feel like a downside to that is that when you don't really pick a child's brain, you don't feed into their curiosity, they're gonna find other ways to get the answers that they're looking for. And in some ways that can be very harmful or detrimental, just depending on which avenues they choose to go through to educate themselves. Life and experience is like the biggest teacher when it comes to things like this. But some of these situations, especially that we experience as young Black women, I feel like could easily be avoided if we had the right conversations with each other. A lot of times our mothers, our aunts, our grandmothers, the women in our families and in our lives, they are trying to protect us in the best way that they know how, and it can cause a rift in communication, because there were situations in this series where Charlotte was curious about things. She was asking, she was inquiring about different things. Annette was shutting the conversation down, and because the conversation was always being shut down, or whenever she would ask a question, instead of Annette saying, well, what made you ask that, or asking why, like, you know, really just picking Charlotte's brain, it resulted in Charlotte not expressing her thoughts, her experiences, or her feelings to her mom. As a result, you know, of course, when you're not talking to people that you initially want to talk to, if something happens, their first response is, why didn't you tell me? I didn't know anything about this. And then you're kind of just sitting there like, well, I didn't tell you because you didn't provide the space for me to say so, or talking to you is hard to do, things like that. That's something that I've experienced myself. There were things that I had experienced or that I had questions about, and I just didn't say anything because having those conversations with the Black women in my life at that time, it was just so hard. It just felt like they were not willing to listen because they saw me as a child and that I don't know any better, and just treating me as if I am not able to understand what is actually going on. Moving forward, when it's that time for, you know, me to be a mom, that's just something that I want to keep in mind. I want to be able to provide a safe space for my children so that they're able to express themselves and talk about things, even if it is something that's a tough topic or uncomfortable to talk about. I want them to understand that they are able to speak up and advocate for themselves, and that not advocating for herself in her own life ended up trickling down to her child. Her child was experiencing things and she was trying to express herself. She was actually expressing herself more than Annette was when she was a child, but it still was a hindrance to her because she's not used to seeing that in her own family dynamic. She's not used to feeling safe enough to do that. So who's to say that once she gets older and she's going through life, she's not able to advocate for herself and advocate for her needs? I just feel like that topic, like that part of the series, it just really hit home for me. I can be expressive, but I know when it comes down to the things that really bother me and really trouble me, I just try to deal with it on my own because I'm so used to being silenced or feeling as if it's not being received or heard. So I just keep it to myself and keep it between me and God because I feel like, you know, we're the only people who care about it. And as a result, now that I'm older, I find myself sometimes in situations where it's like I'm almost afraid to ask for what I need or what I want. I put myself in situations where, you know, now I'm going without because I'm not advocating for myself. I'm not speaking up for my needs. My needs aren't being met and I'm upset about that, but I'm also not talking about my needs and I'm not making those needs known so that they can be met. So it's like I'm the catalyst of my own demise, but at the same time, I have to undo all of that, especially as I get older and I'm growing more into the idea of wanting a family in the future because the kids see what's going on. You may feel like they don't because you send them up to their room. You may feel like they don't hear the conversations and they're not being exposed, but they are. They are well aware and it does affect them. Another thing before we move on to the next book that I want to hit on, I've noticed that when it comes to reading sometimes, maybe because I use it as like a form of escapism, is that I'm expecting perfection from the characters in the book. They may make mistakes, they may trip and fall along the way, but I'm expecting perfection and I don't need to because none of us are perfect. And one thing that I appreciate about this series is that it's real. Some moments may seem a little unrealistic, but these people are dealing with real problems that everybody else deals with. It may not be 100% happy-go-lucky. You might not get your perfect ending, but life isn't perfect in general. So it's definitely helped me just change my perspective, not only in my own life, but also as I read. I finished Flyy Girl by Omar Tyree, and I give it a 3.25 star rating. It's not a bad book. I do feel like I missed, you know, the jet when it came down to reading this book. I probably would have enjoyed it more, or it probably would have resonated with me more if I read it as a teenager or as a child, because the main character, Tracy, she's a child. Like, it goes through her childhood and her childhood experiences. Some of the events that occurred in the book made me uncomfortable, especially because there were some sexually explicit scenes in this book. I do want to go ahead and say that. As an adult reading it, it made me uncomfortable, but then when I went back and I looked at some reviews on Goodreads and people were saying like these were books that they read when they were younger. So they appreciated it because it was like, it was real and it was raw for when you were younger. As an adult reading scenes like that, it's like, oh, like this don't need to be in no book about kids. But at the same time, like that's the reality of things. Like these are things that kids are experiencing. Now I do feel like some of like the description we could have gone without that, but this book was written during a different time, so I'm not going to say too much about that. But I do feel like it does resonate, and it will resonate better with younger audiences. I did buy the physical book of Flyy Girl, but I'm actually going to donate it to my local library. The book was solid. Like, it's not like it was a bad book or anything. It's not a book that I want to keep on my shelves because I'm personally not going to reread that book. But since my local library did not have that book at all, and I have it, I feel like why not donate it so that if there are any young girls or even young boys going going around, you know, in the county and they're interested in a book like that, they actually can read it. This book did have a lot of dysfunctional, abusive, and toxic relationships. I feel like a lot of times we really underestimate how those affect children and how it affects children's relationships with people moving forward. There were dynamics where parents were playing games of like cat and mouse, and chasing seemed to be a really big thing in this book. The girl chasing the guy, and then once she gets the guy, making the guy chase her. And I feel like that's something that's going on a lot these days. Like, everybody loves the chase. Everyone wants something real and genuine, but they love the chase, and then once the chase is over, it's just like, okay, let's move forward. And there was a lot of that in this book. Tracy's parents, they had a dysfunctional relationship, in my opinion. Actually, all of the parents in this story had a dysfunctional relationship. With the parents being so caught up in their day-to-day lives, their dysfunctional relationships, they're not even paying attention to what their children are going through. Kids are kind of just doing whatever, but they're doing what they see. A line that stuck out to me that one of the characters said in this book was inheriting chains of mental cruelty. And there was definitely a lot of that going on in the book. And there's so many situations in life that make me think of this, but when you've been hurt and mistreated and that's all you've known, it's so easy to pass that down to people that come after you, especially once you feel yourself being in a position of power, even if it is something like being a parent or being an older sibling, being above somebody in some type of way. It just trickles down. You've been hurt, so now you're hurting the people around you. You're so caught up in the hurt that you endured and the pain that you're not even realizing the damage that it's causing the people around you. That is something that we pass down in the Black community so much and unknowingly. An example that I want to give you guys, and this is just for me personally, so you know, feel how you feel about it. Getting whoopings as kids. When you're a kid, you do something that your parents didn't like, your punishment, you're getting a spanking with the belt. I used to get spankings as a kid, or whoopings as we called them as a kid. And I remember when I was little, sometimes I would be playing with my teddy bears, and if we're playing school or whatever game we're playing and they said something, even though they couldn't talk, that I didn't like, or they did something that I didn't like, I would whoop them. And I noticed that when I was whooping them, like, I was like really like lashing out, taking my anger out. But honestly, I feel like I was just channeling all of that pain and that hurt that I was feeling from getting whoopings. And it's like, I don't hate my teddy bears. I don't dislike my teddy bears. I love my teddy bears. They were my everything during that time. But I'm inflicting pain on them because I'm hurting. And I want to feel better. I want to feel like I'm in control and I have power. So now I am repeating the cycle. And there was a lot of that going on in this book, especially between the adults. And every time I think about that, I'm just like, okay, we really gotta look within and we gotta work on some things, because man, whew. I read a few other books this week, but those were the two that I actually included in this vlog. All of the other books, I don't really care to talk about. They were okay. If you'd like to see my ratings and how I feel about them, follow me on Storygraph and Goodreads, where you can see all of that. My name is the same on all platforms. Rawfizzle, RAWFIZZLE. That's the name. Don't forget it. But I think I'm gonna go ahead and close out today's reading vlog with all of that. I know that was a lot, and honestly, it was a lot to read through, but hey, we made it to the end. That's all that matters. Before I go in with my closing remarks, I do want to say, you know, this is the second reading vlog that I've put out on this channel. It is something that I want to introduce to my channel and make a consistent thing, because I love to read and I actually like talking about these type of things and opening up these kind of discussions and connecting with people through reading. Reading, like I said before, is such an immersive and reflective experience. Like, you learn so much, even from reading something simple as an autobiography. Like, I really just can't get enough of reading. It's my favorite thing to do, so it won't be going anywhere anytime soon. However, I would love to hear your thoughts. How do we feel about this new content on the channel? Like I said, the hair content is here to stay, but so is the reading stuff. If you have any suggestions on books that I should read, books that you loved and you think that I might love, feel free to drop them in the comments. If you made it this far in the video, I just want to go ahead and thank you for your time and attention, because you could be anywhere else, but instead you're here listening to me yap about these books, and I sincerely appreciate you. See you in the next one.